Have you ever walked into a room, counted the heads, and realized you're the only one? Welcome back to Auntea-Ology, the Antidote Dialogues. I'm Mutinda.
And I'm Sobia, Ali-Faisal.
Last time, we talked about the report that got buried, about what happens when power doesn't like what it hears. This time, we're talking about being the only one in the room who looks like you. At a place that claims to care about equity, we're spilling on the nonprofit industrial complex, the unpaid emotional labor, and why we see you usually means we see what you can do for us. No canceling, just truth. Sobia, how are you actually doing today?
I'm doing okay. I guess with the way the world is right now, that actually in your question gets at a lot. I think it's a wild world, and I think I'm doing okay. I'm in a good place. Everyone around me is, healthy and happy and safe. So yeah, I'm doing well. How about you? How are you actually doing today?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for turning that around. I am doing okay as well. I would say that. And just to kind of reflect on that a little bit, in spite of all the heaviness of the world that's going around, you can't help but see and be impacted by it. But like you as well, I'm grateful for the family, for the people in my life that keep me grounded, and going outside, being in touch with nature. Does that. I was just outside trying not to smell the flowers too closely because I've been experiencing this huge attack of pollen. Yeah, so I'm doing okay and I'm grateful.
Being outside is really important. I need to do that a lot more often, but I know it's good for the mental health for sure.
Yeah, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're here having this conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
So, tea's ready. Let's talk about being the only one. You know what I mean. The room where you scan the table and realize no one else shares your identity. The meeting where someone says something about people like you and everyone looks at you to respond. Or worse, doesn't look at you at all. And the thing is, these are supposed to be the good spaces, the progressive spaces, the nonprofits and coalitions that have equity in their mission statement. And yet you're still the only one, still doing the math, still deciding whether it's worth it to speak, still wondering if anyone would notice if you just stopped showing up. So let's name it. The math you can't stop doing, the therapy you're not paid for, and the question nobody asks. How do you stay whole when you're the only one who looks like you?
So I've got a story about this. So I'm often the only Muslim in social justice spaces that claim to care about equity. And those spaces, unfortunately, can often be Islamophobic without even realizing it. So there's this one particular person that I've been around in nonprofit spaces on PEI. She's been an activist here for a long time. She identifies as queer, as a feminist, and everyone seems to love her, especially in the feminist community. In these spaces, she often talks about the rise in anti-trans rhetoric and anti-queer rhetoric, which, yes, absolutely, that is absolutely real. But then she'll say something like, the queer community shows up for the pro-Palestine movement, but they don't show up for us. Now, I've heard her say some version of this more than once and in more than one place. To me, the implication is clear. It's that queer people show up for Muslims, but Muslims are homophobic and transphobic, which is a gross generalization. It picks on one religious community over others, even though in a North American context, it's usually Christian groups organizing anti-trans movements, and it completely erases the queer and trans Muslims who exist. So she's using a truth, which is the rise in anti-queer rhetoric, to launder an Islamophobic stereotype. And in that moment, I'm often caught off guard. Like, it takes me a second to process what she just said. And by the time I realize it, by the time I feel the weight of it, the conversation has moved on and no one else speaks up either. But here's the thing. She's beloved. In feminist spaces on PEI, she is untouchable. So if I say something, if I stop the room and say, you know what, actually, that's Islamophobic, I'm not just challenging a comment, I'm challenging someone everyone admires, someone with her own marginalized identity. And suddenly I become the problem, the one who made it awkward, the one who's too sensitive, the one attacking a queer feminist. So I stay quiet. Not because I don't want to speak, but because I'm tired and because I'm outnumbered and because the math says if I speak, I lose. And if I stay quiet, at least I can survive being in the room another day. Because in other spaces, if it's not like a beloved feminist, I will speak up when people try the same trick. But in feminist spaces, I feel like I have to watch my words. And that's what the only one means. It's not just being alone. It's being alone while someone with identity based authority says something about people like you, and everyone lets it slide. No one sees you do it, but you have to do it every time.
Mm, yeah, wow. So much is coming up for me, Sobia, and I just want to pause because there's so much there that you shared. The question that just came up immediately, when you were talking about wanting to say something, actually that was Islamophobic, and then you choose not to. The question that came up for me was, do you think there's a hierarchy of oppression at play in the dynamics, because they somehow feel like they can point out something, but as soon as you say, actually in your pointing out is also a level of pain that you're participating in. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like the oppression Olympics that we hear about a lot, right? Like it's like this hierarchy, but it's also this idea that if I'm oppressed in one way, I can't be an oppressor in another way, right? We see this a lot, and unfortunately, I do see this a lot with the white queer community. A lot of folks I have seen will say racist things, ableist things, but because they're queer, they feel like they're not being oppressive and
Hmm.
they can't be an oppressor. And so it's this like hierarchy of marginalization, an unspoken ranking in progressive spaces, especially that some identities are safer to critique than others. And Muslims tend to be fairly fair game for attack.
Mm.
And I've talked about this before in past episodes, but it's just this idea that a queer feminist just can't be harmful, and especially not towards Muslims. Like Muslims just can't be harmed.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, but I'm just saying we know that multiple things can be true at the same time. Someone can be oppressed and be an oppressor.
Absolutely. And that is so important to remember. And a lot of times in our spaces, we don't remember that. We can be oppressed, but also participate in the oppression of others.
Yeah. So you're talking about this, you alluded to it, this erasure within erasure, the violence of saying Muslims don't show up for us. What about the queer trans Muslims in the room or in the movement? So it kind of puts people in one category and makes a generalization about them that they don't do this for us. And so they're not part of the good ones, or and somehow feeling justified in saying that. Like,
And also, like, it also creates this dichotomy, like either you're Muslim or you're queer. You can't be both somehow, like as if intersectionality doesn't exist. And that's what forces so many people who have multiple marginalized identities to feel like they have to put themselves into a box. Either you're Muslim or you're queer. And that's what leaves a lot of people not feeling at home in any of the spaces.
yeah, it functions in essence as a conversation stopper. Like it shuts down the conversation immediately. Do you think that happens consciously, where someone is deciding these things? And I mean, of course, we know that there's systems of harm that have been internalized. And so they're manifesting themselves in this kind of dichotomous way of looking at somebody and saying, you can't be this and that. The intersectionality is missing there.
I mean, I think that just comes down to racism. Really, it's that dehumanization, right? It's not seeing people's full complexity. It goes back to what we've talked about in a previous episode about, not recognizing people's full humanity, not recognizing that people who are oppressed and come from marginalized communities can also be harmful. and not recognizing that people who have multiple identities, including multiple marginalized identities, are just very complex human beings. All of us are. Yes, there are homophobic and queerphobic Muslims. Absolutely, of course. There's racist Muslims, there's ableist Muslims, but that is true of any group of people. And no one group is more so than the other. And even if you do find, say, in a particular group, you find something in a higher rate than others, there are social, societal, historical reasons for that, right? It's not just that these people are inherently somehow more oppressive. Colonization plays a huge role, right? The impact of colonial ideas and understandings of gender and relationships and sexuality have really infiltrated so many of the cultures of the global South that a lot of these beliefs that now a lot of folks would find oppressive actually come from colonial era and colonial imposition and colonial trauma. Like, right, we were traumatized into believing these things. Even when racialized communities, marginalized communities hold problematic perceptions of the world, we still need to understand where they come from. Without that context, then you're just perpetuating more problematic beliefs and more hatred and more division.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this Kenyan author, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, talked about in his text, Decolonizing the Mind. He talked about that. He talked about the history and the idea that we need to understand how we've been shaped by events of our history so that we can be able to learn to see things for what they are and be able to extricate ourselves from that or get free, learn to think for ourselves what is true, and then learn to see each other for who we are in all our complexity and appreciate that diversity as opposed to trying to do the work of the colonial project, which means actually participating in putting each other down.
Absolutely. And we already have enough of a problem in a lot of like white progressive spaces of being put down, right? I mean, if you think about like even in the spaces that I've been in that I mentioned earlier, others don't say anything. And not because they're bad people, but because they don't even probably notice that that's Islamophobia. They don't even realize that what this person is saying is problematic because it's so normalized in their heads, right? And so that silence is just, I mean, their silence is very loud, right? Their silence in those spaces is very loud because it's basically, yeah, we're not going to help you. We're not going to protect you. You know, you're on your own here.
Yeah,
Um,
it's violent because it's quite telling when you think about it, because it demonstrates the lack of understanding of the historical context
mhm.
of how thought is shaped, how knowledge is shaped and formed, and how we think we're thinking the thoughts that we are as free agents. But actually, until we become conscious of what we've internalized and what has been passed down through the colonial project, but also culturally and socially and all those things, and especially when you think about us being the next generation of immigrants who moved to Canada and started new lives there, and the experiences of growing up in another country, in another culture, in another context, what we've been conditioned to think about ourselves and the so-called other, we as the other, and
Yeah.
yeah, like unpack that a little bit maybe.
A lot of times I think when we're in these spaces, we're the other, but we have this pressure to feel grateful, right? That we're in the spaces, that somehow, okay, they let us in. We need to be grateful we're in these spaces, so I can't really say anything. And that often makes us less likely to speak up. I think our generation, it's probably a bit easier. Previous generations, it was probably a little bit harder just because they did face punishment when they spoke up. And mind you, we still do too. There's still that pressure. Like it's still there. Like, oh no, don't say anything. You have this pressure to, okay, I can't say too much because then I'm like that loud, annoying brown person and I have this like weight of everyone else's reputation on my shoulders. And so that ends up silencing us even more, even though like I mean that's always been such a strange concept because it's like we're not even on white people's land, like we're on indigenous land. Yet we have this pressure to adhere to the white culture and to not upset white people and because they're the ones who let us in. I mean, even that idea that they're the ones, the colonizers led us into indigenous lands. It's just that's a whole other conversation to have. But we fall into that. We do fall into that. And I've heard so many immigrant uncles and aunties, "Oh, we're so grateful to be in Canada. It's such a beautiful country. We're so happy to be here." It irritates me so much.
I mean, I'm there with you because I'm like, okay, if that's the energy, their gratitude, I think it should be directed to themselves because they had the insight and the energy to change countries, to go to somewhere they had never been, and to begin a life, learn other languages and nuances and cultures and expectations, and live in a completely different system. I'm thankful for them. It's to themselves for having that vision for something better for themselves and the ones that would come after them. I think that's where that gratitude should be. If we say reality is a construct, what we're living now, somebody imagined that, people imagined that. And so we get to experience and live their imagination. Can we imagine a different reality, a different experience that is recognizing our full and complex humanity? Can we do that? And do we even dare to do that?
I think we have to because someone else telling us who we are, like this person saying that all Muslims don't show up. Like, who are you to tell me that my community doesn't show up? How does this person get to define what Muslims are like and who we are? Like, it is such an aggressive thing for someone to tell someone else what their community is like. It gets really exhausting also to have to fact check them all the time. I keep going back to Toni Morrison's comment about the work of racism is to keep you so constantly like busy just trying to prove that what the racists are saying about you and your people is not true. And you're constantly just, throwing facts at them. And that's where all your energy in your life ends up going into is justifying your existence and trying to fact check people's bigotry and racism against you. And so I think we have to reject it because that's not how we want to live, right? We need to reject their reality of us. We need to reject that reality that they push onto us and imagine a different way of being.
And I think that's the antidote.
Mm.
The alternative is to shift to imagination, to creativity, to find another way, another world, another reality, and to define what that looks like. Not as a response or reaction to where we are, but because we want to deliberately shift our energy for the collective well-being of everybody, and basically all of life in all its manifestations.
Circle or a social justice circle, and there is one person in there with that one identity that's like they're on their own, they're the lone person, and they don't feel safe speaking up. What does that say about your feminist circle or your social justice circle? What have you done that that person doesn't feel safe speaking up when they feel like they're targeted for bigotry?
Yeah, there's a collective antidote, or there's a collective responsibility that provides that antidote. We coexist. We exist together in these spaces. We're doing the work together. This is not about the usual Western mindset, individualistic approach to life. This is a collective growth. It's a collective consciousness. Accountability is to one another. And there's that sense of responsibility. We talk about relational accountability in Seed Room Consulting. And I think this is one of the things that I love and resonates so much with me because I'm continuously trying to hold that and ask myself, how am I showing up in ways that are supporting the deepening of the relationships I'm in through addressing the discomfort, the frustrations, the conflicts, and facing that, because ultimately what we want is the relationship over this idea that, I need to get one over you, or I need to be right, and so I need to exercise my power over somebody. And then I love this idea of the role of joy and grief that the antidote also provides. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Being the only one in a space, it's exhausting. So the antidote can't be just about surviving in those spaces. We have to be thriving in these spaces. So really, we have to make space for grief, what we've endured. But we also have to make room for joy in finding each other, right? It goes back to the point of finding your community. Find your community and work together to come up with ways of navigating it and addressing it, but also make time for joy as well. And I think that's really important to balance all of the work that we do, really, whether it's talking about how do we manage being the only one in the room or how we find the courage to be radically honest. It really is about making sure that we're balancing the grief and the struggle with joy and celebration always in everything that we do. That's also reclaiming our own identities, right? It's reclaiming our definition of who we are as opposed to the oppressor's definition or the colonizer's definition or whatever, how they see us is a very particular way. And so reclaiming the joy in life is also a way of rejecting those understandings of us.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Can we hold both naming the harm and celebrating the miracle of connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to. The harm has to be named. There has to be accountability. We need to have accountable spaces. So naming the harm is very important, but also we have to celebrate and we have to have joy and we have to celebrate connection and being with each other if we need it for our mental health.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love that. Like in the midst of naming the harm, there's also this space that we can make for joy and celebration and freedom and healing and wholeness with each other. I love that because I think that's demonstrative of how big, how generous life is. It's not just, there's harm and there's destruction. A lot of it is human made, but there's cycles of life. And so entering all of it, all the complexity of life, I think is a mirror of all the complexity of who we are and getting to know that ourselves individually deeper, but also in community and in connection with one another. So here are some questions to sit with this week. When's the last time you counted the heads in the room and you realized you were the only one? What's the math you do that no one sees? The calculation of whether it's safe to speak. Who in your life is doing the math right now? And have you asked them? And if you've ever been the person who stayed silent while someone else was the only one, what would it take for you to speak up next time? Sit with these questions. Let them unsettle you. That's where the work begins. So we started by asking about being the only one in the room. And here's what I'm sitting with after Sobia's story. The math you do, the calculation of whether to speak, whether it's safe, whether it's worth it, that math is real. And it's not your fault that you do it. But it's also not the whole story. Because the whole story is also this. You found your people. You built the rooms you needed. You're still here speaking your truth, even after all the times the math told you to stay quiet. And that's the miracle. Not that the rooms changed, but that we found each other anyway.
Next time, we're going to talk about what it means to move at the speed of trust. What that actually looks like in practice, not just as a concept.
If this episode stirred something, if you've done the math, if you've been the only one, if you're tired of counting, we've built spaces for that work. The Auntea-Ology monthly gatherings, the Navigating Conflict in Social Justice Spaces online course, resources and toolkits, coaching and consulting for those ready to find their people. Links are in the show notes. And if you want to talk about what landed, reach out. info@seedroom.ca. Free discovery calls, no pitch, just a conversation. Thank you for pulling up a chair. Come tired of counting. Leave knowing you're not alone.
Stay messy, stay curious, and stay loving.